History books erased her existence. The royal archives burned every letter she ever wrote. But hidden beneath the ruins of a 12th century fortress, a single blood-stained diary survived. This is the suppressed true account of a king's madness, a stolen crown, and the night two newborn alphas shattered the heavens. In the bitter winter of 1142, the kingdom of Ethelgard was not ruled by mere men, but by the Iron Mane clan, a bloodline of lycanthropes whose dominance was as absolute as it was brutal. At the helm of this ruthless empire stood King Micah, known in the suppressed chronicles of Sir Thomas of Oakhaven as the Beast Sovereign. Micah was a towering, terrifying figure. His reign was marked by military genius and a terrifyingly short temper, kept in check only by the mate bond he shared with his newly crowned queen, Sidney of House Artois. Sidney was not born with the wolf's curse. She was a human noblewoman given to Micah in a strategic alliance to unite the warring northern territories. Yet the moment Micah laid eyes on her in the great hall of Winterborn, the legendary mate bond snapped into place. It was a visceral soul-binding connection that left the Alpha King obsessively devoted. For the first 2 years of their marriage, the kingdom flourished. The court records from the era speak of a golden age where the king's beast was tamed by Sidney's gentle yet unyielding spirit. But a mate's devotion in a lycanthrope is a double-edged sword. Love can seamlessly warp into a suffocating possessive obsession, especially when the bloodline is threatened. The fracture began in the spring of 1144, the month Sidney's royal physician confirmed she was with child. The news should have cemented their dynasty, but instead it triggered a catastrophic chain of events. Within the king's inner circle lurked Chancellor Edric, a cunning political mastermind who harbored a deep-seated hatred for the human queen. Edric belonged to a purist Lycan faction. He believed that mixing alpha blood with a human would produce weak, feral abominations that would ultimately lead to the downfall of the Iron Mane dynasty. Drawing upon forgotten dark prophecies, Edric began a systematic psychological campaign against the king. Every evening he would pour Micah's wine, subtly lacing it with a microdose of refined wolfsbane, not enough to kill, but enough to induce severe paranoia and feverish delusions, a condition historically known as the Alpha's madness. Edric whispered poison into the king's ear, planting seeds of doubt. He claimed that Sidney's child was not Micah's, or worse, that the child was a cursed hybrid, destined to tear out the king's throat and usurp the crown. Driven mad by the wolfsbane and the terrifying vulnerability of impending fatherhood, Micah's protective instincts inverted into monstrous tyranny. The turning point occurred during the autumn equinox gala. Sidney, now 4 months pregnant, was speaking with her brother, Lord Arthur of Artois. In a fit of chemically induced blind jealousy, Micah shifted into his half-wolf form in the middle of the crowded great hall, nearly tearing Arthur limb from limb before his royal guards could intervene. Panting, his eyes glowing an unnatural sickly amber, Micah turned to his trembling pregnant mate. "You are not safe," he growled, the voice of his beast completely overshadowing the man she loved. "And the realm is not safe from what grows inside you." That very night, under the cover of a torrential downpour, the cruel Alpha King committed the act that would forever stain his legacy. He stripped Sidney of her royal titles, dismissed her loyal ladies-in-waiting, and had her dragged to the high tower of Galdor, an isolated, wind-battered stone spire at the northernmost edge of the fortress. The tower was an impregnable fortress, within a fortress heavily lined with silver ore, within the stone walls to weaken any lycanthrope who dared approach. For Sidney, a human, the silver meant nothing, but it served as a brutal barrier, ensuring no one from the pack could reach her, and ensuring her unborn child would be suppressed. She was locked in a sparsely furnished circular chamber, with only one barred window, looking out over the jagged cliffs of the Iron Valley. Micah convinced himself that he was doing this to protect her from the political vipers of the court, and to protect himself from the monstrous prophecy Edric had fabricated. But in reality, he had buried his mate alive. For months, Sidney languished in the freezing stone tower. Her only company was a mute servant woman named Martha, hand-picked by Chancellor Edric to ensure the Queen remained completely isolated. The cruelest part of her imprisonment was the mate bond itself. Despite the stone and silver, Sidney could feel Micah's fractured, chaotic emotions, his rage, his sorrow, and his descending madness echoing in her own chest. She knew her husband was lost to a sickness of the mind, but as her belly swelled to an unnatural size, a fierce, primal, maternal instinct took root in her human heart. She was not just carrying one child. She could feel the violent, restless energy of two. And they were not weak. Even in the womb, the supernatural strength of the royal bloodline was evident. Winter arrived in Ethelgard with a vengeance, burying the fortress in 5 feet of snow. Inside the high tower of Galdor, the temperature plummeted. Sidney, now in her 9th month, was frail, her human body barely able to sustain the immense magical and physical toll of carrying lycanthrope offspring. Her cheeks were hollow, her skin pale as porcelain, but her eyes burned with a defiant, calculating fire. She had not been idle during her imprisonment. Sir Thomas's diaries revealed that Sidney, despite her human fragility, was a master of observation. She noticed the way the mute servant Martha meticulously disposed of the king's food scraps that were occasionally sent up to the tower. She noticed the faint, distinct scent of bitter almond and burnt earth, the undeniable signature of distilled wolfsbane. It was then Sidney realized the horrifying truth. Edric was not just poisoning the king. He was attempting to poison her and the unborn heirs through the servant. Feigning a loss of appetite, Sidney had been secretly feeding the tainted royal meals to the ravens that landed on her windowsill. Surviving instead on the dry bread and clear water, she demanded Martha fetch directly from the castle's deep well. As her due date approached, Micah's visits became increasingly erratic. He would stand on the winding stone stairs outside her heavy iron door, never entering, simply pressing his hands against the cold wood. Sidney could hear his ragged breathing, the tormented whines of his inner wolf, weeping for the mate it had locked away. "Give me the child when it is born, Sidney." Micah's voice would echo through the thick oak, entirely devoid of the warmth that had once wooed her. "Edric has prepared a sanctuary for it. It will be raised away from the court, away from me. It is the only way you survive." Sidney knew exactly what sanctuary Edric had prepared. It was a shallow grave in the frozen woods. "If you take my child, Micah, the bond will snap," Sidney replied one freezing evening, pressing her own hands against the inside of the door, matching where his palms rested on the outside. "And you will die a mad, broken beast entirely alone." He did not reply. He only walked away, the heavy thud of his boots descending the spiral staircase, sounding like the final beats of a dying heart. The climax of this hidden history arrived on the night of the blood moon, the final lunar eclipse of the year. The skies above Ethelgard turned a bruised, violent crimson. It was on this night that Sidney's water broke. The pain was immediate and unfathomable. Lycanthrope births were notoriously violent, often requiring the strength of an alpha mate to help sustain the mother's life force. Sidney had no one. The mute servant Martha, realizing the queen was in labor, panicked and locked the chamber door from the outside, running down the tower to alert Chancellor Edric so he could execute his final murderous plan. Left entirely alone in the freezing moonlit chamber, Sidney dragged herself to the center of the room. The silver-lined walls seemed to hum in the presence of the blood moon. She bit down on a strip of leather torn from her own cloak to muffle her screams. She knew that if she cried out, The castle guards, loyal to Edric, would ascend the stairs before the birth was complete. She had to survive. She had to protect the true heirs of Ethelgard. The tempest outside raged wind, howling against the stone spire, as if the gods themselves were weeping. Down in the great hall a feast was underway. King Micah sat slumped on his throne, pale and sweating his mind, swimming in a toxic haze of wolfsbane and wine, while Edric stood by his side, whispering his final venomous lies. Back in the tower, after hours of agonizing silent labor, the first cry pierced the icy air. Sidney collapsed back onto the stone floor, gasping for breath, pulling a massive, perfectly healthy baby boy to her chest. He was born with a full head of thick raven hair, and when he opened his eyes, they glowed a piercing, unnatural gold. An alpha. But the torment was not over. Her body seized again, a violent contraction that nearly shattered her ribs. Minutes later, a second child was born into the cold world. Another boy, identical to the first, but with eyes that burned like the crimson moon outside. Twin alphas, a genetic impossibility in Lycan history, an event prophesied to either herald an era of unprecedented peace or total annihilation. Exhausted, bleeding, and hovering on the absolute brink of death, Sidney wrapped her sons in the thick furs of her bed. She could hear the heavy booted footsteps marching up the spiral staircase. It was not a rescue. It was Edric leading a squadron of rogue wolves, bypassing the king entirely to smother the queen and her abominations. As the heavy iron key turned in the lock, Sidney looked at her two sons. She possessed no physical strength to fight off armed men. She had no magic, but she had given birth to the raw, untamed power of the Iron Mane bloodline. Instinctively reacting to their mother's terror and the impending threat beyond the oak door, the newborn twins did something that defied all laws of nature. They did not cry. They inhaled the freezing air, tilted their tiny blood-streaked heads toward the barred window, where the red moon hung heavy in the sky, and they howled. It was not the weak, high-pitched wail of human infants. It was a booming, supernatural, bone-rattling roar that exploded from the high tower. The sound wave carried a kinetic, ancient magic. It shattered the thick glass of the tower window. It rippled through the falling snow, tearing the winter storm in half. The howl cascaded down the stone walls, plunging deep into the heart of the fortress. It bypassed the stone and the silver, striking the soul of every lycanthrope in Ethelgard. In the great hall, the silver goblet slipped from King Micah's hand, clattering against the stone floor. The wolfsbane haze in his eyes instantly evaporated, burned away by the undeniable dominant call of his own flesh and blood. The king stood up his chair, violently crashing backwards. The beast he had tried to suppress, the father he had been manipulated to fear, awoke. The deafening roar of his newborn sons tore through the fortress, shattering the poisoned fog that had clouded King Micah's mind for nearly a year. In the grand hall, the suffocating grip of the wolfsbane vanished instantly, replaced by a violent, unadulterated surge of primal adrenaline. He blinked the sickly amber hue of his eyes, erupting into a brilliant, dominant crimson. The sheer force of his awakening sent a shockwave across the room, cracking the stone beneath his boots. The beast he had suppressed was fully unleashed, driven by one singular overriding imperative: protect his mate and his cubs. Chancellor Edric, standing mere feet away, realized his catastrophic failure. He drew a silver blade, shouting treasonous commands to his loyal guards, but he was far too late. Micah did not merely shift. He exploded into his monstrous Lycan form, bypassing the human transition entirely. With a terrifying roar, the Alpha King leaped across the high table, his massive claws severing Edric's arm, before the traitor could even swing his weapon. The great hall erupted into absolute chaos, as the king's loyalists, emboldened by the return of their true alpha, instantly turned upon the rogue faction. Blood painted the stones. Micah did not stay to watch Edric bleed. The bond pulled him with a gravitational violence toward the high tower of Galdor. He tore through the heavy oak doors of the grand hall, sprinting into the raging blizzard. The freezing winds whipped against his fur, but he felt absolutely nothing. The supernatural howl of his sons echoed again, desperate and commanding, vibrating within his hollow ribs. The king scaled the icy steps of the courtyard with terrifying speed, his massive frame barreling toward the isolated spire. Edric's assassins were already ascending the spiral staircase, weapons drawn to kill the queen. Inside the frigid chamber, Sydney clutched her weeping twins to her chest. The heavy wooden door shuddered violently under the assault of the rogue soldiers. Splinters flew into the dark room as axes bit into the ancient oak. She had no weapon, only her fading heartbeat, and the fierce heat radiating from her supernatural children. The first assassin breached the room, stepping through the shattered doorway with a cruel sneer, a silver broadsword gleaming in his hand. Sydney closed her eyes, shielding the babies with her fragile human body, praying for a swift death. But the death blow never landed. A thunderous crash shook the entire tower as the stone wall of the stairwell exploded outward. Micah had not bothered to climb the spiraling stairs. He had scaled the sheer exterior of the tower, ripping through the silver-lined masonry with his bare claws. The king crashed into the chamber like a falling star, grabbing the lead assassin by the throat and hurling him out the shattered window into the abyss. The remaining rogue soldiers froze in absolute terror as their alpha, covered in stone dust and blood, turned to face them. His roar shook the foundation of the world. The massacre was breathtakingly brief. Micah moved with a lethal grace, a hurricane of teeth and claws, instantly obliterating the men who had dared to threaten his family. Within moments, the chamber fell dead silent, save for the howling wind and the gentle whimpers of the newborns. The king, chest heaving, slowly reverted to his human form. He fell to his knees on the freezing floor, surrounded by the horrific carnage. Trembling violently, he crawled toward the corner where Sydney lay, slumped, shivering against the stone, her beautiful face, as pale as the snow, drifting through the broken window. Sydney Micah choked out his voice, completely broken. The madness was gone, leaving only crushing, agonizing guilt in its wake. He wrapped his large, warm arms around her freezing body, pulling her and the two radiant infants against his broad chest. The twins instantly stopped crying, recognizing the scent of their sire. But Sydney's eyes were unfocused, her breathing painfully shallow. The immense physical toll of birthing two alpha heirs without the stabilizing energy of her mate had drained her life force. The mate bond between them was flickering violently, a dying candle in a brutal, merciless winter storm. "I am here, my love." The king wept, pressing desperate, frantic kisses to her forehead, transferring his own heat into her shivering frame. "I am so sorry. The poison, the lies. I was lost in the dark, but you brought me back. Please do not leave me now." Sydney offered a faint, exhausted smile, her weak fingers tracing the sharp line of his jaw. "They are beautiful, Micah," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Our sons. The future of Ethelgard." Her hand slipped from his face, hitting the stone floor as her eyes fluttered closed. The bond went completely silent. A sound of sheer, unadulterated agony ripped from the king's throat, a wail of ultimate despair that silenced the roaring blizzard outside. He clutched his lifeless mate, rocking her back and forth in the darkness, begging the ancient gods for mercy. The royal archives note this exact moment as the darkest hour in Lycan history, the tragic cost of political deception. But the legends of the Ironmane clan do not end in tragedy. The magic inherent in a royal bloodline is profound, unpredictable, and fiercely protective. the twin alphas, sensing the absolute severance of their mother's soul, began to glow. An ethereal golden light radiated from the tiny infants, cutting through the heavy gloom of the blood-stained chamber. The twin boys, born under the immense power of the crimson moon, possessed a deep reservoir of ancient magic that had never been documented in the historical chronicles of the frozen north. They reached out with their small hands, pressing tiny palms against Sydney's still chest. King Micah watched in stunned, breathless silence as the golden energy transferred from the newborn cubs directly into their mother's quiet heart. It was rare magic cubs willingly sacrificed today. They chose to resurrect their human creator today. The freezing temperature in the ruined stone room skyrocketed rapidly, melting the thick snow that had gathered on the floorboards. Sydney's fragile body arched violently as the raw, pure magic flooded her exhausted human veins, knitting torn flesh back together and forcing her stopped heart to beat once more. With a sudden, desperate gasp, she pulled in a massive breath of winter air. The warm color violently rushed back to her pale cheeks, and her weary eyes snapped wide open, blazing brilliantly with exact same radiant golden and deep crimson, glorious lights. These bright colors directly mirrored her lovely son's eyes. Micah collapsed forward and buried his face down inside her neck, sobbing loudly. He cried with absolute, overwhelming relief and deep devotion. He carefully scooped his entire beloved family into his strong arms, rising from the bloody stone floor with a newly found and renewed physical strength. Shielding them safely within his thick fur cloak, the proud king carried his precious queen and his perfect heirs down the spiraling stairs, walking far away from the cursed and freezing dark tall prison. By the exact time they finally arrived safely downstairs, there the fierce battle was entirely and completely over. The fiercely loyalist royal forces had completely decimated the treacherous and rogue enemy soldiers, leaving no single hostile survivor breathing inside the castle walls this night. Chancellor Edric, missing an arm and bleeding profusely from his terrible wounds, was securely held captive on his trembling knees before the Iron Throne. As Micah confidently entered the room, carrying the living proof of his unbroken and glorious dynasty, every single surviving soldier quickly dropped to one knee in total absolute submission. The dense silence filling the grand tall stone hall was absolutely, totally complete. It was broken only by the loud crackling of the great warm hearth fires. Micah gently and lovingly placed Sydney upon the soft royal dais, wrapping her delicately in the finest red velvet blankets, before turning around slowly to directly face the fully ruined former chancellor lying there. The furious king did not shout. His raging anger had crystallized into a cold and terrifying absolute authority. You falsely sought to break my mind and murder my innocent family. Micah spoke clearly, his deep voice echoing with the resonant, terrifying timbre of his inner, raging, fierce, angry, wild beast soul today. You greatly underestimated the true strength of a loyal human queen, and you had completely misjudged the immense, untamed power of the true royal pure Ironmane bloodline. The traitor Edric trembled violently harshly, coughing up dark black blood onto the highly polished grey stones. She is a weak, fragile human. He wheezed weakly, glaring upward with venomous hatred at the calm queen. Her spawn will ruin us all. Micah did not grant the evil traitor another single spoken word. With one single swift, forceful motion of his heavy, sharp broadsword, the king brutally severed his head entirely from his body. This action completely ended the poisonous and deadly rebellion forever. The headless body slumped heavily to the bloody floor, a grim, violent warning to any individual who would ever dare question the strict legitimacy of the crown or the undeniable, terrifying strength of the royal mate bond. The dark, long era of terrible shadows and endless political deceit had been finally and permanently concluded on this cold, fateful red winter night in Grand Ethelgard. With the lingering threat completely and totally eliminated, Ethelgard boldly entered a profound extended period of intense cultural healing and totally unprecedented, immense financial royal prosperity. Sidney, who was permanently altered by the magical resurrection generously bestowed upon her by her twin alpha sons, miraculously stopped aging altogether. She quickly gained a supernatural, endless vitality, confidently ruling directly alongside Micah with a gentle, loving, yet unyielding inner wisdom that slowly became the literal stuff of absolute romantic legend. The grand historical archives, carefully written by Sir Thomas, vividly and poetically describe her as the beautiful immortal mother of wolves, a former human woman who successfully and bravely tamed the most vicious king. She confidently birthed the two most incredibly powerful lycanthrope rulers ever truly born here. The growing royal twins, bravely named Arthur and Leonidas, physically grew at a terrifyingly rapid magical pace. By their early 10th winter, they were already physically larger and significantly stronger than fully grown seasoned warriors. Arthur proudly possessed the calculating, highly strategic, sharp mind of his immortal human mother and the piercing, golden, bright eyes of a traditional alpha. Leonidas clearly inherited the volatile, intensely explosive, quick temper of his passionate father, his glowing crimson eyes always reflecting the extremely violent red blood moon under which he was definitely born. Together, they represented their perfect, ultimate, brilliant mental physical balance. They were always fiercely and deeply protective of their beloved mother, frequently standing armed guard outside her private chambers, strictly ensuring no possible harm could ever physically approach her ever again. Micah humbly spent the rest of his extremely long, happy life making daily amends for the horrific past mistakes of his chemically poisoned madness. He carefully constructed a magnificent, sprawling glass conservatory for Sidney, joyfully filling it with the absolute rarest, most exceptionally beautiful blooming flowers sourced from across the entirely known human world, guaranteeing she would never ever feel physically trapped behind freezing cold stone walls any day. He ruthlessly destroyed the high tower of Goldor, entirely reducing the tall silver-lined spire to a pathetic pile of unremarkable crushed rubble, completely erasing the physical cruel monument of his absolutely greatest marital failure. His undying devotion to his forgiving mate became a deeply sacred romantic oath, a beautiful living testament to the incredibly enduring, majestic power of true, profound forgiveness and deep love. Centuries later, long after the physical stone fortress of ancient Ethelgard eventually crumbled to fine dust, and the human world entirely forgot the true, factual existence of powerful lycanthropes, scholars uncovered this totally extraordinary history. The forgotten history of the Ironmane dynasty proves that even the darkest madness cannot break a true mate bond. If this unearthed tale of Queen Sidney's resilience and the Alpha King's redemption captivated your heart, please, like this video, share it with your fellow history and romance lovers, and subscribe to our channel. We bring hidden medieval archives to life every single week. Hit the notification bell so you never miss another epic, untamed royal legend. Thank you for watching.